The day my son stopped calling me mama and started calling me busy was the day my heart first cracked. I didn't know then how deep that crack would go, or how one woman's closed smile could slam so many doors in my life. I'm Loretta Johnson, 68 years old, born and raised on the south side of Chicago, the kind of woman who believes food is love and family is sacred. I raised my son, Marcus, with Sunday dinners, church hats, and the firm belief that blood don't just make family. Effort does. When he told me he was getting married, I cried happy tears right there in my kitchen, my hands still dusty with flour from the peach cobbler I was baking. I prayed for a daughter, and I thought God had answered. Her name was Evelyn. The first time I met her, she hugged me like she was reaching for something just out of arm's length. Polite, yes. Warm, not quite. Her smile didn't touch her eyes, and my spirit noticed before my mind did. Still, I told myself not to judge. Young folks carry their own baggage, and Lord knows I carried mine too. I opened my arms anyway. "Call me Mama Loretta," I said, patting her hand at dinner that night. "Or just Mama, if that feels right." She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that floats and disappears. "Oh, I'm more comfortable with first names," she replied, glancing at Marcus like she needed permission to breathe. I swallowed that little sting and passed the greens. From the very beginning, I tried. I invited her shopping, offered recipes, asked about her childhood. Each time, I was met with polite walls. She kept conversations surface level, like we were strangers waiting for an elevator instead of family bound by love. Marcus started coming around less, always with excuses. Work, traffic. Evelyn wasn't feeling well. One evening, I called him just to hear his voice. "Mama, I'll call you back," he said, rushed and distant. He never did. I told myself not to worry. Sons grow up. They build lives. But late at night, sitting alone in the quiet hum of my house, I felt something slipping away. Old age has a way of amplifying silence. The clock ticks louder. Memories talk back. At their wedding, I watched Evelyn stand beside my son, her hand firm in his, her eyes scanning the room like she was measuring who belonged and who didn't. When the photographer called for immediate family, she hesitated before motioning me forward, and that hesitation spoke louder than words. After the ceremony, I tried to pull Marcus aside. "You okay, baby?" I asked, brushing imaginary lint from his sleeve. He smiled, but it didn't reach me. "Yeah, Mama, everything's good." But it wasn't. Weeks turned into months. Invitations stopped. Phone calls went unanswered. When I finally did see them, Evelyn sat close to Marcus, whispering things that made him nod slowly, his eyes avoiding mine. I started feeling like a guest in my son's life, like someone who overstayed her welcome without ever being told. One night, I stood in my living room holding a framed photo of Marcus as a boy, gap-toothed smile, scraped knees, arms wrapped around my neck, and I whispered, "What happened to us?" I didn't know then that this was only the beginning, that the doors she closed would include the one to my son's heart, and that I'd soon be standing on the outside, knocking softly, wondering how love could turn so cold. The first time I realized I was being erased from my own son's life, it wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, like dust settling on furniture no one uses anymore. That silence hurt worse than any argument ever could. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because Tuesdays used to be Marcus's favorite day to call me on his drive home from work. He said my voice helped him unwind from the world. That day, my phone stayed still on the coffee table, screen dark, mocking me. By evening, worry crawled into my chest. I called him instead, straight to voicemail. I left a light message. "Hey baby, just checking on you. Call your mama when you get a chance." Hours passed, nothing. The next day, I tried again. This time, Evelyn answered. "Hello?" Her voice was tight, clipped. "Oh, hi Evelyn, it's Loretta. I was just trying to reach Marcus." There was a pause, just long enough for me to feel like I'd interrupted something sacred. "He's busy," she said flatly. "He'll call you later." He didn't. That weekend, I decided not to wait anymore. I baked a lemon pound cake, Marcus's favorite since he was 10, and drove over unannounced, something I'd done freely before marriage without a second thought. When Evelyn opened the door, surprise flickered across her face, quickly masked by irritation. "Oh, hi," she said, not stepping aside. "I brought cake," I smiled, lifting the container like a peace offering. She glanced back into the house. "Marcus is resting. We weren't expecting company." Company. That word hit me square in the chest. "I won't stay long," I said softly. She hesitated, then stepped aside just enough for me to enter. The house smelled like expensive candles and something unfamiliar, nothing like home. Marcus came down the stairs slowly, his smile strained. "Mama," he said, hugging me briefly, like he was afraid of being seen. We sat at the table, the cake untouched. I tried to make conversation, but Evelyn answered for him, corrected him, redirected him. When I asked about his health, she jumped in. When I asked about work, she sighed loudly. Finally, I said, "Marcus, you haven't been calling me." He shifted in his chair. "I've been busy." I looked at Evelyn. Busy people still make time for their mothers. Her eyes sharpened. "We're building our own family now," she said. "Things change." That's when I felt it. That door closing. Solid. Intentional. I wanted to cry, to scream, to remind her I was the woman who carried him, prayed over him, loved him before she ever knew his name. But Auntie Loretta swallowed her pride like she'd been doing for months. "I just want to be included," I said quietly. Marcus didn't meet my eyes. "Mama, you're being sensitive." Sensitive. The word he used when Evelyn didn't want to be challenged. I left shortly after, cake still in my hands. In the car, I sat gripping the steering wheel, tears blurring my vision. I wasn't angry yet. I was grieving the slow loss of my son, the way a mother feels when her child drifts into someone else's shadow. That night, alone in my bed, I prayed, "Lord, show me the truth and give me strength for what's coming." Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just distance. This was influence. And the woman I tried to welcome with open arms was quietly rewriting my place in my own child's life. The moment I realized I was no longer welcome in my son's world came wrapped in a lie so small, yet it shattered something sacred inside me. Betrayal doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers your name and pretends it never called. It was my birthday. Not a milestone one, just 69, but I've always believed birthdays matter. They remind us we're still here, still worth celebrating. Marcus used to wake me up early every year, even as an adult, singing off-key and laughing at himself. This year, the morning passed in silence. By noon, my phone hadn't buzzed once. I told myself not to assume. People get busy. But by evening, that quiet felt deliberate. I finally called him. No answer. I sat at my dining table, a single plate set in front of me, candle unlit, cake untouched. I didn't want a party, just acknowledgement. Just my son's voice. Around 8 p.m., my neighbor Gloria called. "Loretta, baby, happy birthday. I saw Marcus and his wife at the new restaurant downtown. Thought of you." The fork slipped from my hand. "At the restaurant?" I asked carefully. "Yes, ma'am. Looked like a celebration, too. Balloons and all." I thanked her and hung up, my chest tight, my ears ringing. So that's where he was. Not busy, just elsewhere. Without me. Later that night, Marcus finally called. "Hey, Mama," he said casually. "Sorry I missed you earlier." "Oh?" I replied. "Gloria said she saw you out celebrating." Silence. Then a sigh. It wasn't a big deal. I felt something harden in my voice. It was to me. From the background, I heard Evelyn's voice, low, sharp. "Who are you talking to?" Marcus covered the phone. "Mama." "Evelyn feels like you're putting pressure on me." Pressure. "Marcus," I said slowly, "I just wanted a happy birthday." Another pause. "We'll talk later." The line went dead. That night, I cried the kind of tears that don't make noise, the kind that sink into your pillow and stay there. I thought about every sacrifice I made, every late shift, every prayer whispered over his sleeping body, and I wondered when love became something I had to beg for. Weeks later, I found out something else. At church, Sister Naomi pulled me aside. "Loretta, I didn't want to say anything, but I thought you should know. Evelyn told folks you're difficult, that you don't respect boundaries." My heart dropped. Difficult. That's what she was telling people, painting me as some overbearing mother instead of a woman fighting loneliness and loss. Suddenly, the distance made sense. The silence. The way Marcus spoke to me like I was an obligation instead of his mother. I confronted him gently one afternoon when he finally agreed to meet me for coffee. "Are you ashamed of me?" I asked. He looked uncomfortable. "Mama, it's not like that." "Then why am I being pushed out?" He rubbed his temples. "Evelyn feels you don't like her." I laughed softly, bitterly. I tried to love her. "Well," he said, "maybe your way of loving feels like control." That's when I realized I wasn't just losing my son. I was being rewritten as the villain in a story I helped begin. I went home that day and sat in the quiet again. The same walls, the same memories, but something had shifted. I wasn't just lonely anymore. I was wounded, and wounds, if ignored, fester. The hardest part of being pushed aside isn't the absence. It's the way people pretend it's your fault. That realization settled into my bones the morning I stopped setting an extra place at my table. I remember standing in my kitchen, plate in hand, staring at the empty chair Marcus used to claim every Sunday. For years, no matter what life threw at him, he showed up for dinner. Fried chicken, cornbread, laughter echoing off these walls. Now the chair just sat there, silent, accusing me of holding on too long. I put the plate back in the cabinet. That's when the loneliness truly began. Days passed where the only voice I heard was the television or my own thoughts. Friends called, church sisters checked in, but it wasn't the same. There's a special kind of quiet that comes when your child chooses distance. It feels unnatural, like a song cut off mid-verse. One afternoon, I received a message from Marcus, just a text. "We need to set some boundaries." My hands trembled as I read it again. Boundaries, such a clean word for something so cruel. I replied carefully, "I'm open to talking." His response came hours later. "Evelyn feels overwhelmed. We're asking for space." Space from what? My love? My concern? My existence? I didn't reply. Instead, I sat on my couch and let the weight of it sink in. This wasn't coming from my son alone. This was her voice, her language, her rules. And Marcus, my baby, was repeating them like they were his own. That evening, I called my sister, Denise. "They're icing me out," I told her, my voice cracking despite my effort to stay strong. She sighed. "Loretta, I've seen this before. Some women don't want a mother-in-law. They want control." "I never tried to control anything," I said. "I know," she replied gently, "but truth don't always matter when someone's rewriting the story." A few weeks later, I tested that space. I mailed Marcus a handwritten letter, no accusations, just love. I told him I missed him. I reminded him I was proud of the man he'd become. I asked him to call when he was ready. The letter came back unopened. Return to sender. My knees buckled when I saw it. I slid down against the door, clutching that envelope like it could explain how things had gotten so cold. That's when anger finally bubbled up beneath the grief. How dare she? How dare she erase me from my own son's life like I was a mistake instead of a mother? I started replaying every interaction with Evelyn, every subtle dismissal I brushed aside. The way she corrected me in front of others, the way she rolled her eyes when I spoke about family traditions, the way Marcus slowly stopped defending me. It wasn't accidental, it was deliberate. Still, I prayed every night. I asked God to soften hearts, to open eyes, to restore what was breaking. But prayer doesn't mean passivity, and somewhere between tears and faith, I felt a shift inside myself. I deserved respect. I deserved honesty, and I deserved my voice. When Marcus finally called weeks later, his tone was formal. "Mama, we're coming by to talk." Not "I'm coming," I noticed. "We." I straightened my back after hanging up, smoothing my dress like armor. Whatever conversation was coming, I knew one thing for certain. I was done shrinking. And this time, I wouldn't be silent while someone else decided my place in my own family. When they pulled into my driveway that afternoon, my heart pounded like it was warning me of a storm I couldn't outrun. Some conversations change relationships forever, and I knew, before the doorbell rang, that this would be one of them. I opened the door to see Marcus standing stiff beside Evelyn, her lips pressed tight, eyes already scanning my home like she was preparing evidence. My home. The place where Marcus took his first steps, scraped his knees, learned how to pray. "Come in," I said calmly, stepping aside. They sat on the couch together, knees angled inward, a united front. I remained in my armchair across from them, folding my hands to keep them from shaking. Silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. Evelyn spoke first. "We've been feeling like there are expectations," she said, her voice measured but sharp at the edges. "Unspoken ones." I looked at Marcus. "Is that how you feel too?" He hesitated. That pause hurt more than her words. "Mama, Evelyn, and I need to build our marriage without outside pressure." Outside, as if I hadn't been inside his life since his first breath. "I never pressured you," I said quietly. "I loved you." Evelyn leaned forward. Love can still feel intrusive. That's when something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not violently, but clean and clear. "Tell me exactly what I've done," I said. "Not feelings, actions." She blinked, caught off guard. "You show up unannounced. You ask personal questions. You expect weekly calls." I let out a slow breath. I showed up with food. I asked how my son was doing. I expected connection. Marcus shifted. "Mama, you have to admit, sometimes it's a lot." I stared at him. Really stared. This grown man who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares was now calling my love a lot. "So instead of talking to me," I said, "you let me be painted as the problem?" Evelyn crossed her arms. "This isn't about blame." "Yes, it is," I replied, my voice steady but firm, "because I was never given a chance to adjust. I was just cut off." Marcus finally looked at me then, guilt flickering across his face. "We thought distance would help." "Distance doesn't heal confusion," I said. "Communication does." The room felt heavy. Even the walls seemed to lean in, listening. "I want peace," Evelyn said, "but peace requires boundaries." "And respect," I added, "which I haven't been given." She opened her mouth to respond, but Marcus spoke instead. "Mama, Evelyn is my wife." I nodded slowly. "And I am your mother. Those two truths can exist without canceling each other." He looked torn, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw my son again, buried beneath obligation and influence. "I'm not asking to run your life," I continued. "I'm asking not to be erased from it." Evelyn stood abruptly. "I think this conversation is becoming emotional." I smiled sadly. Family usually is. They left shortly after. No resolution, no apology, just unfinished sentences and closed expressions. When the door shut behind them, I stood there for a long time, listening to the echo of absence. That night, I didn't cry. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and accepted a painful truth. Love alone doesn't guarantee access. And sometimes, the people we raise choose comfort over confrontation, even when it costs them something sacred. But I also realized something else. I had spoken my truth, And whether Marcus was ready to hear it or not, the door I'd been knocking on was no longer the only one that mattered. Because if reconciliation was ever going to happen, it wouldn't come from my silence. The silence after they left felt heavier than all the lonely nights combined, because this time it came with clarity. When the truth finally settles in, it doesn't rush. It sits with you, unblinking, daring you to look away. For days after that visit, I replayed the conversation in my mind, every word Marcus said, every look Evelyn gave me. I kept asking myself where I went wrong, then stopping myself just as quickly. Mothers do that, take responsibility even when the wound isn't self-inflicted. Marcus didn't call, not to check on me, not to clarify, not to apologize. And I didn't call him either. That was new. I focused on myself, something I hadn't done in years. I went back to my morning walks, joined the women's Bible group I'd skipped too many times waiting on a son who never showed. I laughed with friends again, real laughter, not the polite kind you give when you're holding something in. But healing doesn't move in a straight line. One afternoon, I ran into Marcus's childhood friend, Jamal, at the grocery store. He looked surprised to see me. "Ms. Loretta, how you doing?" I smiled. "I'm all right, baby. How's your mama?" We chatted briefly before he hesitated, then said, "I saw Marcus last week." My heart skipped. "You did?" "Yeah," he said carefully. "He seemed stressed." I nodded. "Marriage will do that." Jamal shifted his weight. "He mentioned you, said things were complicated." Complicated. That word again. "What did he say?" I asked, bracing myself. Jamal lowered his voice. "He said Evelyn feels like you don't support their marriage." I let out a slow breath. "Support looks different when you're standing on the outside." Jamal nodded, uncomfortable. "I just thought you should know." I thanked him and walked to my car, hands shaking. So that was the narrative being passed around. I wasn't just distant, I was unsupportive. The villain role was getting more lines. That night, I sat with my journal and wrote everything I'd been holding back. Not for Marcus, for me. Every hurt, every memory, every moment I swallowed my pride to keep peace that never came. And that's when I realized something painful but freeing. Evelyn didn't just want boundaries, she wanted control over the story. A few days later, Marcus finally called. "Mama," he said softly, "I've been thinking." "So have I replied. There was a pause. "Evelyn feels like things are tense." I closed my eyes. "Marcus, when do you feel something?" He sighed. "I feel stuck in the middle." "No," I said gently. "You're standing somewhere. You just don't want to admit where." Silence stretched between us. "I love you," he finally said. "I love you too," I replied. "That's why this hurts." He didn't argue. He didn't reassure me either. After we hung up, I understood that love doesn't always come with courage. And my son, my sweet, complicated boy, was choosing the easier path, the quieter one, the one that didn't require him to confront his wife or himself. I cried that night, not out of despair, but acceptance. I could no longer chase someone who kept walking away, and as painful as it was, I also knew this story wasn't finished, because secrets have a way of surfacing, and when they do, the truth demands to be heard, whether people are ready or not. Something was coming. I could feel it. The truth didn't arrive like thunder. It crept in through a cracked door, quiet but undeniable. And once it stepped inside my spirit, there was no pretending I hadn't seen it. It started with a phone call I almost didn't answer. "Loretta?" the voice said, unsure. "Yes? This is Denise Harper. I'm Evelyn's mother." My chest tightened. We'd only met twice. Both times brief and polite. I sat down slowly. "Hello, Denise." There was hesitation on the line, then a sigh. "I hope I'm not overstepping, but I thought you deserved to hear some things." I closed my eyes. "I'm listening." She spoke carefully, like someone walking through glass. "Evelyn has always struggled with..." sharing, especially when it comes to people she loves. She had a difficult relationship with her own mother-in-law before my husband passed, and it left scars. Scars. Suddenly, pieces began shifting into place. She feels threatened easily, Denise continued, and Marcus, well, he reminds her of the stability she's afraid to lose. So she pushes me out, I said quietly. Yes, Denise admitted, and he lets her. That last part landed hard. I've tried talking to her, she added, but she insists she's protecting her marriage. I thanked her for calling, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. After we hung up, I sat in silence, letting the truth wash over me. This wasn't about me being overbearing or insensitive or difficult. I was collateral damage in someone else's unresolved pain. Still, understanding didn't erase the hurt. Days later, I received an invitation in the mail, a baby shower, for Evelyn. My hands trembled as I read the card again. They were expecting, my first grandchild, and I hadn't even known. I felt joy surge up, pure, instinctive, followed immediately by devastation. This moment, this milestone, had been kept from me, intentionally. I called Marcus. "You're having a baby," I asked, forcing my voice to stay calm. He hesitated. We were waiting for the right time to tell people. "Am I people?" I asked. Silence. "I'm happy for you," I said softly. "Truly, but I'm hurt." Evelyn's voice cut in through the speaker. We didn't want added stress. Added stress. A grandmother's joy reduced to a liability. "I won't stress you," I said firmly, "but I won't disappear either." She didn't respond. After that call, something shifted in me. This wasn't just about my relationship with my son anymore. There was a child coming into this world who would grow up hearing a version of me that wasn't true, unless I stood up now. I attended the baby shower. I walked in with my head held high, wearing the pearls my mother left me, carrying a gift wrapped with care and intention. Conversations paused when I entered. Eyes followed. Whispers fluttered. Evelyn looked surprised. Marcus looked nervous. I hugged her gently. "Congratulations," I said. "You're going to be a wonderful mother." She nodded stiffly. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't demand attention. I simply existed, warm, dignified, present. And I noticed something. People gravitated toward me. They asked about Marcus's childhood. They laughed at my stories. They listened. Truth has a way of shining without force. As I left that afternoon, Marcus followed me outside. "Mama, thank you for coming." I met his eyes. "I'll always show up. The question is whether you'll let me stay." He didn't answer, but for the first time in a long while, I felt something other than loss. I felt resolve, because love doesn't mean erasing yourself to make others comfortable. And the next chapter of this story, mine, Marcus's, and that unborn child's, was about to demand honesty in ways none of us could avoid. I didn't realize how fragile my place in their lives was until I was nearly written out of the future altogether. Sometimes, the deepest wounds aren't caused by what's said, but by what's decided without you. A week after the baby shower, I received an email. Not a call, not a conversation, an email. It was from Marcus. "Mama Evelyn and I have been talking. We've decided it's best if you're not present at the hospital when the baby is born. We want that moment to be just us." I read it 3 times, hoping I misunderstood. Not present, as if I were some distant acquaintance instead of the woman who gave him life. I called him immediately. He didn't answer. So I sat at my dining table, the same place where I once set 3 plates every Sunday. And I let the reality sink in. This wasn't about peace or boundaries anymore. This was exclusion, dressed up as protection. Later that evening, he finally called back. "Mama, don't," I said gently but firmly. "Just listen." He went quiet. "I never asked to be in the delivery room," I continued. "I never asked to cross your wife's comfort. but being told, without discussion, that I don't belong near the beginning of my grandchild's life, that cuts deeper than you realize. He exhaled. Evelyn's anxious. She needs calm. And what about me? I asked. Do I not need consideration too? Silence again. That familiar refuge. You're choosing what's easiest, I said, not what's right. That's not fair, he replied defensively. No, I said softly. What's not fair is being erased quietly so no one has to feel uncomfortable. I could hear Evelyn in the background murmuring something. Then Marcus said, "We'll talk later." But later never came. Days passed, then weeks. I started imagining my grandchild's face without knowing their name, wondering if they'd ever recognize my voice, if I'd be allowed to hold them without supervision, without tension hanging in the air like a warning. One afternoon, I ran into Evelyn's cousin at the pharmacy. She smiled awkwardly. "You must be so excited," she said. "For what?" I asked. "The nursery reveal. Evelyn posted it online." My heart sank. I hadn't seen it. I hadn't been told. Again. That night, I looked it up. Pastel walls, carefully staged photos, Marcus smiling wide, arm around his wife, thousands of likes, dozens of comments. No mention of me. I closed my laptop and stared into the dark. That's when I realized something I'd been avoiding. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a pattern. And patterns don't change without confrontation. I prayed that night, not for access, not for apology, but for wisdom, for strength, for the courage to stop begging for space in a life where I once held center. The next morning, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. I wrote Marcus a letter, not an emotional one, not a pleading one, an honest one. I told him how proud I was of the man he'd become. I told him I respected his marriage. And then I told him, clearly and without apology, that I would no longer accept being treated like a problem instead of family. "I will not compete for a place that should be given freely," I wrote. "But I will always be your mother, and I will not pretend otherwise to make things easier." I mailed the letter and felt something lift from my chest. Whatever happened next, whatever doors remained closed, I had reclaimed my voice, and sometimes that's the beginning of a reckoning no one sees coming. The call came at 3 a.m, slicing through my sleep like a blade I'd been sensing for weeks. When your spirit stays on alert long enough, even rest feels temporary. "Mama," Marcus whispered, his voice trembling. "She's in labor." I sat up slowly, heart pounding, every emotion colliding at once: joy, fear, longing, restraint. "Is she okay?" It's complicated," he said. "They're taking her in for an emergency C-section." I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer before he could hear my breath shake. "I'm praying. Please keep me updated." There was a pause. "Mama, Evelyn doesn't want anyone at the hospital." There it was again. That familiar wall. "I understand," I said, though every part of me screamed otherwise. "Just call me when the baby arrives." When the line went dead, I sat in the dark living room, robe wrapped tight around me, waiting. I didn't drive to the hospital. I didn't push. I honored their boundary even as it pressed against my chest like a weight. Hours passed. At 7:42 a.m., my phone buzzed with a photo. A tiny hand, pink, perfect. "It's a girl," Marcus texted. "Her name is Ava." Tears streamed down my face as I pressed the phone to my heart. A granddaughter, my first, a legacy I didn't know if I'd be allowed to touch. "She's beautiful," I replied. "I'm so thankful she's safe." No response. That afternoon, I watched from my window as neighbors walked their dogs, life moving forward while mine felt paused. I waited for a call that never came. Evening fell, then night. The next day, church sisters called with congratulations before Marcus did. They'd seen the post, photos of him holding Ava, Evelyn glowing, captions about "our perfect little family." I wasn't included. 3 days later, Marcus finally called. "We're home," he said. "It's been overwhelming." "I can imagine," I replied. "How's Ava?" "She's healthy," he said quickly. "Evelyn's tired." "I'd love to bring a meal," I offered. "Just drop it off." Another pause. "We'll let you know when we're ready for visitors." Visitors. I hung up after a polite goodbye and sat very still. Something inside me had gone quiet. Not numb, just resolved. I wasn't going to chase this moment the way I'd chased every other one. I had learned what chasing cost. 2 weeks passed before I saw my granddaughter. They invited me over on a Sunday afternoon, strict window of time, 1 hour. When Evelyn placed Ava in my arms, something ancient awakened inside me. I rocked her gently, tears falling freely. She smelled like new beginnings. "She has your nose," I said softly to Marcus. Evelyn shifted uncomfortably. "We're being careful about overstimulation." I nodded, handing Ava back sooner than my heart wanted. As I stood to leave, Marcus walked me to the door. "Thank you for understanding," he said. I looked at him, really looked. "I understand more than you think." Driving home, I realized something painful but powerful. They could control access, but they couldn't control truth. One day, Ava would ask questions about family, about love, about absence, and when that day came, I would be ready. Because this story wasn't over. It was only getting louder. They say time heals, but nobody tells you how slowly it moves when you're waiting for love to show up uninvited. After Ava was born, every day felt like I was standing in a hallway with doors on both sides, closed, locked, and guarded by silence. Weeks turned into months, and my role as grandmother became carefully rationed. I was allowed short visits, scheduled in advance, always supervised. Evelyn hovered like a security guard, correcting how I held Ava, how long I rocked her, even how softly I hummed the hymns my own mother sang to me. "That song might make her fussy," she'd say. Ava would be fast asleep. Marcus noticed. I know he did. But noticing isn't the same as acting. He'd smile nervously, change the subject, or suddenly remember something he needed to do in the other room. One afternoon, while Evelyn was upstairs changing Ava, Marcus lingered in the kitchen with me. The quiet between us felt thick, unfinished. "You okay, Mama?" he asked. I looked at my son, the man he'd become, and chose honesty without sharpness. "I'm learning how to love from a distance." His jaw tightened. "It doesn't have to be like this." "Then why is it?" I asked. He didn't answer. A few days later, I received a message from Evelyn. Direct, unexpected. "I think it's best if we keep visits limited for now. I need to feel secure as a mother." I read it twice, then set my phone down and stared at the wall. Something in me finally reached its limit. Not anger, but clarity. I called Marcus that evening. "This isn't sustainable," I said calmly, "and I won't pretend it is." He sighed. "Evelyn's trying her best." "So am I," I replied, "but only one of us is being asked to disappear." There was a long pause. Then he said something that cut deeper than any boundary ever could. "She feels like you judge her." I laughed softly, not out of humor, but disbelief. For wanting to be present, for loving my granddaughter? "She didn't grow up with that kind of closeness," he said. "And I didn't grow up raising a son just to be treated like a threat," I replied. That night, I cried again. But these tears were different. They weren't desperate. They were cleansing. The next morning, I made a decision. I stopped reaching out. No texts asking for updates. No offers to help. No gentle reminders that I existed. I focused on my life, my church, my friends, my health. I traveled with my sister. I laughed more. I lived. And something interesting happened. Marcus started calling. At first, small things. "Mama, how do you make that cornbread again?" Then longer conversations. He sounded tired, strained, like someone holding too much without saying it. One evening, he said quietly, "I didn't think it would be this hard." I didn't say, "I told you so." I just listened. A week later, he showed up alone. "I needed air," he said, sitting at my table like he used to. I poured him sweet tea and waited. "She doesn't trust anyone," he admitted. "Not really." I met his eyes, including me. He nodded, shame flickering across his face. "I'm not asking you to choose," I said. "But I am asking you to stop letting me be sacrificed for peace that doesn't last." He didn't respond right away, but something had cracked. Not broken, cracked. And sometimes that's how the light gets in. It was a cold Thursday morning when I realized that standing back and letting Marcus come to me had changed everything. Just a little, but enough to shift the balance. I was in the kitchen, humming softly as I prepared oatmeal for myself, when my phone buzzed. It was a photo. Ava. Sitting in her high chair, messy little hands clutching a spoon, looking directly at the camera like she already understood that someone far away loved her fiercely. No caption, no text, just the photo. I held the phone close to my chest, tears slipping down my cheeks. That small gesture said more than words could. Somewhere between Evelyn's walls and Marcus's hesitation, a door had cracked open. And it didn't matter that it was small. It was a start. Later that morning, Marcus showed up at my door, alone, for the first time in months. I opened it slowly, unsure of what this visit would hold. "Good morning, Mama," he said softly. "Morning, baby," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. My house smelled like cinnamon and baked apples, comfort and love lingering in every corner. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured us both tea. There was a quiet tension, but it wasn't hostility. That was progress. I wanted to talk," he said finally, "about Evelyn, about Ava, about us." I nodded, waiting. "I didn't realize how much she—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't realize how much it was affecting you." I took a slow breath. "Marcus, it's not about Evelyn. It's about you, me, and our family. We can't lose sight of that." He looked down at his hands. "I know, Mama. I feel trapped sometimes." "Trapped?" I asked softly. "Yeah," he said. "I want to honor my wife, but I also don't want to lose you or Ava, and somewhere in the middle, I feel like I'm failing everyone." I reached across the table, placing a hand on his. "Honey, you're not failing anyone. You're just learning how to balance love with loyalty. It's hard. It always is. But you don't have to choose. You just have to be honest." His eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared she'll resent me. That she'll resent you." "Then let her see what real family love looks like," I said. "Let her see that it's possible to include instead of exclude." He nodded slowly as if tasting the truth for the first time. I want that too." For the first time in months, I felt hope. Hope that the walls Evelyn had built around herself weren't permanent. Hope that Marcus remembered who he was beneath all the tension and fear. Hope that Ava would grow up knowing she had a grandmother who loved her fiercely, and that love was allowed to exist without conditions. We sat in silence for a while, sipping tea, letting the warmth of the kitchen and each other's presence fill the spaces that fear had carved out. By the time Marcus left, the sun was dipping low, casting golden light across the living room floor. I realized that family isn't always about grand gestures or big moments. Sometimes it's about small steps, steps toward honesty, steps toward inclusion, steps toward letting love be seen and felt, even when it's complicated. That night, I prayed, not for reconciliation, not for permission, but for courage. Courage to keep showing up, courage to keep loving, and courage to face whatever doors might close in the future. Because I had learned something vital. Love is never wasted, even when it feels like it's blocked or ignored. And I knew, deep in my heart, that my fight for family wasn't over, not by a long shot. It happened slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. A text here, a phone call there. Marcus began checking in more often, asking questions about Ava, asking about me, and while it wasn't perfect, it was enough to remind me that love, even strained and complicated, never really dies. One evening, I received a photo from him. Ava, wide-eyed and sitting in her crib, blankets tucked snugly around her. Written in the caption were two simple words, "Miss you." Tears filled my eyes, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to smile without restraint. It was a small gesture, yes, but in it I saw a bridge beginning to form, a bridge built not on words, but on love and recognition. 2 days later, Marcus came by unexpectedly. Alone. He didn't knock. I heard the familiar hum of his car engine and my heart jumped anyway. Opening the door, I found him standing there, hands in his pockets, eyes hesitant. "Mama," he said softly, "can we talk?" "Of course, baby," I said, stepping aside to let him in. We sat in the living room. The familiar smell of my cinnamon-scented candles filled the air. The quiet between us was heavy but not hostile. He finally spoke. "I've been thinking about everything," he said, voice tight. "About Evelyn, about Ava, about you, and I realized something." I waited, silently. "I've been letting fear guide me," he admitted. Fear of conflict, fear of upsetting Evelyn, fear of making mistakes. And in the process, I let you feel erased. I let you feel unwelcome. And Mama, that was never my intention. I reached across the table and held his hand. "I know, baby. I know it wasn't intentional. But intention doesn't erase impact." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I want to fix it. I want Ava to know her grandmother. I want you to know her." My chest tightened, a mix of relief and residual hurt. "Marcus, rebuilding trust takes time. We'll do it one step at a time." "I understand," he said, "and I'm ready to do that." That afternoon, we spoke at length about boundaries, about expectations, about honesty, about letting Ava grow up in a home where love wasn't measured by control or fear. And somewhere in that conversation, I felt the walls between Marcus and me crumble, brick by brick. A week later, Evelyn called. Her voice was quieter than I remembered, almost hesitant. "Loretta," she said, I wanted to apologize." I blinked. "For?" "For keeping you at a distance, for making it hard. I see now that I was afraid of losing my place, afraid of, I don't know, but I realize I've been unfair." I felt the weight of months of tension begin to lift. "Evelyn," I said softly, "I never wanted to take your place. I just wanted to love my family. That's all I ever wanted." There was a pause. "I know," she whispered, "and I want us to try again, for Ava and for Marcus, and for you." I closed my eyes and let the words sink in. For the first time, I felt the beginnings of a truce, one born not from submission but from understanding. That night, I sat in my kitchen, journal open, tea steaming at my side. I wrote about hope, about love, about the resilience it takes to fight for family, and I realized that even when doors close, even when hearts harden, love has a way of returning if we're willing to wait, to listen, and to forgive. Because family isn't perfect. Family isn't easy. But family is worth fighting for. The weeks that followed felt like the first tentative steps after a long, stormy night. Slowly, carefully, Evelyn began letting down her walls. Not entirely, of course. She was still cautious, still protective. But there was a softening in her eyes when she looked at me. And Marcus? Well, Marcus seemed lighter, as if a weight he hadn't fully acknowledged had finally lifted. It was a Saturday afternoon when I first held Ava without reservation. Evelyn handed her to me, her hands lingering on the baby's tiny back as though granting permission for the first time. I felt Ava's little arms wrap around my neck, her warm breath against my cheek, and I whispered softly, Hello, my angel. I've been waiting for you. Evelyn's voice was quiet behind me. Thank you for being patient. I turned to her and smiled. Patience isn't hard when you're waiting for love this pure. Marcus stood beside us, his hand brushing mine as I held Ava. Mama, I don't know how to thank you enough, he said, for waiting, for forgiving, for loving us all through this. I shook my head gently. Baby, love doesn't need thanks. It needs presence. That evening, I cooked dinner for them all. Fried chicken, collard greens, macaroni and cheese, dishes that had been passed down through generations. Evelyn watched as I moved through the kitchen, her eyes softening each time I glanced her way. It was subtle, but I noticed. And Ava, my little granddaughter, babbled happily in her high chair, unaware of the history and tension that surrounded her. We sat down together, and for the first time in months, conversation flowed without restraint. We laughed about Marcus as a clumsy toddler, shared stories from my youth, and even heard Evelyn speak candidly about her fears of being a mother and a wife simultaneously. There were still boundaries, yes, and we respected them. But for the first time, I felt like a part of the family again, not a guest, not a shadow, not a threat. After dinner, I helped Marcus clean up while Evelyn held Ava. She looked at me and said softly, I see now why you're important to him, to all of us. My heart tightened with both relief and tenderness. I never wanted to replace anyone, I said. I just wanted to love. And sometimes love requires patience, humility, and standing firm when it matters most. Evelyn nodded. I'm learning that. Later, as I drove home, the city lights blurred past, and I reflected on everything that had brought us here. The closed doors, the silence, the fear, and the distance. Every moment of heartbreak had led to this fragile peace, this first step toward a true family bond. I realized then that life doesn't always give you the stories you expect. Sometimes it gives you tests of love, patience, courage, and forgiveness. And sometimes, just sometimes, you pass them in ways that leave scars and lessons, but also hope. I prayed that night, not just for reconciliation, but for continued growth, understanding, and the courage to keep showing up. I knew there would still be hard days, misunderstandings, and moments where past wounds reopened, but I also knew something else. That love, genuine and steadfast, can endure, even through doors that have been slammed and hearts that have been closed. Because family isn't always about perfection, it's about showing up, over and over again, and learning to let love lead when fear tries to take control. It was during one of those quiet Sunday afternoons that I realized the full weight of what had changed. The sun streamed through my kitchen window, painting everything gold, and I was sitting at the table, a cup of tea warming my hands, when my phone buzzed, a photo from Marcus, Ava, sitting in her little walker, smiling with 2 tiny teeth showing. The caption read, "Grandma taught me this song today." I laughed softly, my heart swelling with emotion. That small gesture, the caption, the photo, the acknowledgement, meant more than words could ever express. She had seen me, remembered me, and allowed me to remain a part of her life. And that, my child, is what family is. Presence, even through the mess, even through the heartbreak. Later that day, they came over. Marcus, Evelyn, and Ava. For the first time, Evelyn didn't hover. She allowed me to hold my granddaughter for as long as I wanted, to sing to her, to play peekaboo, to rock her until her eyes grew heavy with sleep. I felt her little hand curl around my finger, and my heart felt like it would burst with love. Marcus watched quietly, a small, proud smile on his face. "Mama," he said, "thank you for being patient with us." "I've never been impatient with love, baby," I replied, rocking Ava gently. "Even when it hurts, love is patient. Love endures." Evelyn leaned back, watching quietly, her eyes soft. I could see her reflection in Ava's bright eyes, the realization that a grandmother's love wasn't a threat. It was a gift. And I knew, deep down, she had begun to understand. After a while, we sat around the kitchen table, laughing and talking like family again. Marcus shared stories about work. I shared memories from my own childhood, and Evelyn even told a story about her late father, a story I hadn't heard before. The air between us was lighter, filled with warmth and understanding. That night, after they left, I sat quietly in my living room reflecting on the journey we had all taken. The closed doors, the long silences, the unspoken fears. They had all been part of the process. Painful? Absolutely. Necessary? Apparently so. Because without those trials, none of this, the laughter, the shared memories, the reclaimed love, would have been possible. I realized that love isn't about being invited in or given permission. It's about showing up anyway. It's about standing firm when the world seems determined to shut you out. And sometimes it's about letting others find their way back to you in their own time. I looked at the framed photo of Marcus as a child, now joined by another frame of Ava, asleep in my arms. 2 generations I had loved, 2 generations I had fought for, and I understood something important. Even when hearts are closed, love can find a way through. I whispered a prayer of gratitude that night, not just for reconciliation, but for the courage to endure, for the wisdom to remain steady, and for the love that had brought us all back together. Because family is messy. Family is complicated. But family, my child, is always worth it. It was a rainy Thursday evening when I realized how far we'd come, and yet how fragile the peace still was. The rain tapped against the windows in steady rhythms, a reminder that life moves whether we're ready or not. I sat in my living room, Ava asleep in her bassinet, and Marcus and Evelyn quietly talking in the kitchen. The warmth of the house contrasted sharply with the chill outside, and I felt a deep, lingering sense of gratitude. Marcus caught my eye across the room and smiled. "Mama," he said softly, "I can't tell you how much it means to me to see you with her." I smiled back. "Baby, it's always been about her, and you too, but I'll admit it feels good to be seen again." Evelyn emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. "Loretta," she said hesitantly, I want to thank you for your patience, for not giving up on us, on me." I reached out and touched her hand. "Evelyn, love doesn't always follow a straight line. We all make mistakes. We all let fear guide us sometimes, but we can choose to do better. That's what matters." She nodded, a tear threatening to escape. I'm learning that. Slowly, but I am." That night, after they left, I sat at the window, watching the rain soak the streets. I thought about the months of silence, the doors that were slammed in my face, the long nights of worry and aching hearts. And yet, here we were, slowly rebuilding what had been broken, slowly learning to include instead of exclude. I thought about Ava, and how small she was, yet how much power she had to bring people together simply by existing. She was a bridge between Marcus and me, between Evelyn and me, between past misunderstandings and a future of possibilities. And in her tiny hands, I saw hope. The next morning, I decided to bake. Peach cobbler, just like I used to, the kind Marcus devoured as a child. I set it on the table, wrapped in a warm cloth, and called Marcus to let him know. When he arrived, his face brightened. "Mama, you didn't have to," he said, laughing softly. "I know," I replied, "but some things are too important not to do." Evelyn watched from the doorway, a small smile on her lips. She didn't interfere. She let me be the grandmother, and I let her be the mother. For a moment, it felt like harmony. Not perfect, but enough. Ava giggled when I tickled her tiny toes, and Marcus laughed with her, softly, as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace. And in that moment, I realized something essential. Love is not a single act. It's a series of small, patient choices, a commitment to showing up even when it's uncomfortable, a willingness to forgive, even when you're hurting. Later that evening, I wrote in my journal, "Family isn't perfect, family isn't easy, but it's worth every tear, every prayer, every moment of patience." And as I closed my journal, I knew the story wasn't finished. We still had work to do, boundaries to respect, lessons to learn. But for the first time in a long while, I believed in the possibility of a future where love could win over fear. Because love, when it's true, never lets go. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind of quiet that feels like the world is holding its breath. The house smelled like baked apples and cornbread, sunlight spilling through the windows and warming the wooden floors. I sat in the living room, Ava playing quietly on the rug, Marcus and Evelyn nearby. And in that moment, I realized how far we had come, not just in miles or months, but in hearts and understanding. I looked at Marcus, my son, the little boy who once ran into my arms after nightmares, the man who had let fear guide him, and now the father who was learning to navigate love and loyalty. "Baby," I said softly, "look at her. She's learning from all of us now." He smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Mama, thank you for everything, for never giving up on me, on us." I reached over and took his hand, feeling the warmth of connection that had almost been lost. "Honey, I never stopped loving you, not once, and I never will. That love isn't about permission, it's about presence, always." Evelyn stepped closer, Ava in her arms. "Loretta," she said, "I see now that your love isn't threatening. It's necessary. And I want Ava to grow up knowing her grandmother's heart, fully and without fear." I smiled, reaching out to touch her shoulder. "That's all I ever wanted. Not to replace anyone, not to control anyone, just to love and be part of the family God gave me," Ava cooed, stretching her tiny arms toward me. I leaned in, holding her close, feeling her warmth, her heartbeat, her life, and I whispered, "Hello, my angel. Welcome to a world where love fights for you, even when it's hard." For a while, we sat together in quiet, letting the soft rhythm of our breaths fill the room. I could feel the barriers dissolving, slowly but surely. Evelyn had begun to trust. Marcus had begun to prioritize. And Ava, tiny and innocent, was the living proof that love could heal even the deepest wounds. Later, as I tucked her into her crib, I looked down at her peaceful face and thought of all the doors that had been closed. How many times had I stood outside, hoping for entry, hoping for connection, hoping for understanding? And yet, here we were, inside the house, inside hearts, inside a love that refused to give up. I sat back, exhausted but fulfilled, thinking about the journey, the betrayal, the silence, the fear, the patience, the prayer, the courage. I had learned that family isn't about control. It's not about being first or right or convenient. It's about showing up consistently, steadfastly, honestly. And sometimes it's about standing firm when the world tries to erase you. I whispered a prayer of gratitude for Marcus, for Evelyn, for Ava, for myself, for every moment that had tested me, every tear that had shaped me, every lesson that had forced me to grow. Because love, I realized, is not fragile. It's relentless, it's patient, it's courageous, and it's always worth fighting for. That night, I sat by the window, looking out at the stars, and I felt peace for the first time in a long time. Our story wasn't perfect. It wasn't without struggle, but it was real. And real love always finds a way, even when doors are closed, even when hearts are hurt. I whispered softly into the quiet, Family isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up together. And I will always be here, ready, patient, and loving, no matter what. And with that, I knew the long journey of heartbreak, patience, and persistence had led us here. A place of understanding, a place of hope, a place where love finally won. The doors were open now, not just to my son, not just to my granddaughter, but to the future we were all ready to build together. The story ends here, but the love? That continues, relentless and everlasting.